Love, family, and betrayal. 3 words that tell the story of Whitney Houston's growing up from a 7-year-old church singer to one of the best-selling artists of all time.
The most successful debut solo album in history.
She's quickly becoming the new queen of pop.
But we'll review that behind the curtains of success is the heartbreaking truth of her family. This is the family of Whitney Houston.
It ain't all the glamour and all that stuff. It's hard work. It's a lot of work. But when you love it, it feels good.
There are a lot of members of Whitney's family, but in this video, we'll be covering the most important people to her career. Now let's start off with her father, John Russell Houston. Born on September 13, 1920, was an Army veteran that served in the Second World War. He was also a regular municipal worker when he met Sissy, Whitney's mom, in the spring of 1957. John was married to another woman named Elise Hamilton at the time, but they later got divorced. John then married Sissy Houston in 1959 and moved his family to the more middle-class area of East Orange, New Jersey, due to the racial tension in the United States back then. John was a stay-at-home dad, so that meant more father-daughter bonding time between himself and Whitney. He would later recall how he would make her meals, get her ready for the day, and tuck her in at night before Sissy got home from the studio. It was quality time well spent with Whitney that made John realize his daughter was special. During interviews, John talked about how he would tuck Whitney into bed, and she kicked the covers off, making him give her the nickname Nippy, a nickname gotten from a cartoon character that always got in trouble. He was happy with how things were going until the Houston family was hit with its first tragedy. In 1976, Mr. John Russell Houston had a heart attack that almost claimed his life. At first, this made him and his wife Sissy get closer, but after his recovery, things weren't the same anymore. Sissy and John kept having issues before they decided to get a divorce. Some of the reasons for their divorce involved cheating allegations from both parties, with John saying his heart attack was a result of the stress from his marriage. After their divorce, John Russell Houston decided to get a house a few blocks away, making it easy for him to see his daughter Whitney anytime he was allowed to. And according to John himself, the first time he realized Whitney's voice was phenomenal was the moment he heard her sing a solo rendition of Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah at the New Hope Baptist Church, Newark, New Jersey. A few years after that, John got married to his third wife, Barbara Houston, so he wasn't seeing much of Whitney anymore. While on the other hand, Whitney got signed to her first record deal, making her need some exclusive management, and that's when her father, John, came back into her life. Whitney made John her manager in 1985, and 6 years later, John put Whitney on the pedestal of success by securing her a role in America's Holy of Holies, the Super Bowl. In 1991, Whitney was invited to sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl, but after a demo tape was done, the NFL's bigwigs deemed it was being too jazz. Whitney's father, still looking over his daughter's shoulder, found out about this and demanded that the NFL back off or get another singer. In the end, John Houston's threats did indeed get management over the NFL to back down from their demands, and Whitney would sing the song as she originally intended. It was fortunate, though, that she did, because her performance ended up being one of the most memorable in NFL history. Whitney absolutely nailed the song, and her passion translated well with the patriotism of the moment, because the game was being played right in the middle of the Gulf War, which saw U.S. troops fighting in Iraq. But down the line, things got messy for Whitney and her father. In 2002, her father's company, John Houston Entertainment, sued Whitney for $100 million, following a rumor of breach of contract.
Well, that money is not mine. 7 points is mine. And that's what she was supposed to give me. I told her what I wanted, and she agreed to it. Okay, Daddy.
And although the lawsuit didn't particularly mention John's name, it contained details of Whitney not paying for services rendered by the company. Then 5 years after John's death on February 2, 2003, his third wife, Barbara Houston, also tried making a whopping $1 million from Whitney by filing a lawsuit over a life insurance policy. Barbara's lawsuit claimed that the insurance was to pay off a mortgage Whitney held over John's home and the remaining balance handed over to her. If that kind of sounds confusing, well, that's because it is, and as you might have thought, Whitney never paid Barbara a dime. Whitney Houston once said the most important person in her life was her mother, Sissy Houston, and by the time you hear Sissy's story, you'd understand why.
When evening falls.
Born on September 30th, 1933, Sissy Houston recognized the power in her voice from an early age, just like her daughter Whitney. But the difference was, Sissy didn't have her parents by her side all through her musical journey. Sissy Houston's mother died of a cerebral hemorrhage when she was just 8 years old, while her father died of stomach cancer when she was 18. Left all alone in the world, Sissy decided to go live with one of her sisters, and it was from that moment that her life changed forever. Living with her sister, Sissy became religious, also began manifesting the power in her voice. She sang with the church choir and soon after joined a group of extremely talented singers called the Drinkard Sisters. Sissy performed with this group from the year 1938 to around the mid-50s when she got married for the first time to a man named Freddie Garland. Freddie and Sissy then had a son together, Gary Garland. If that name rings a bell, well, that's because Gary Garland is a former NBA player. However, while Sissy's still married to Freddie, she met John Russell Houston Jr., the father of Whitney Houston. In Sissy's biography, Remembering Whitney, she stated that the moment she saw John, she felt an instant connection. She described him as a tall and well-built man with an attractive charisma. At that time, Sissy had made a name for herself in the music industry. She was signed to Atlantic Records and was the backup singer for many big names in the industry. As Whitney grew older, Sissy helped nurture her amazing voice. But it wasn't Sissy alone who did this. Whitney's brothers also had a hand in helping her harness the power in her voice from a very young age. Michael Houston was born March 17, 1958 in Newark, New Jersey. He took interest in music from a very young age and by the 1980s had established himself as a songwriter, producer, and music industry professional. Michael left a bit of a negative impact on Whitney, as many close friends of theirs feel Michael's addiction to drugs enabled or even encouraged Whitney's addiction. But despite these challenges, Michael Houston remained an important figure in Whitney Houston's life. Today, he is remembered for both his contributions to Whitney's success and for the challenges he faced in his own life.
There's only you.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, Whitney had a half-brother by the name of Gary Garland. Gary was born on October 12, 1957, and is a former NBA player. He was part of the 1979 NBA draft and played one season for the Denver Nuggets. Gary grew up with Whitney Houston, and contrary to what you might think, he is also a very good singer.
Wonderful counselor.
After he was released by the NBA in 1980 for failing a drug test, Gary became a background vocalist for Whitney's Greatest Love Tour in 1986, as well as her 2010 Nothing But Love Tour. And yes, I've mentioned how Whitney grew up in a musical family, but so far I've only talked about her parents and her siblings. So who are the other artists from Whitney's family? Well, for starters, there's Dee Dee Warwick.
If I drowned in my own tears, would it help?
You cannot describe soul music of the 70s without throwing the name Dee Dee Warwick into that description. Dee Dee, born on September 25, 1942, was an American soul singer and cousin to Whitney Houston. Dee Dee put the soul in soul music with her amazing records, which included the hit songs Foolish Fool and She Didn't Know. Dee Dee was also known for her powerful and soulful voice, as well as her contributions to the music industry in the 1970s and in Whitney Houston's early career. When Whitney Houston was young, she spent time around Dee Dee and her sister Dionne Warwick, who was also a successful singer. Both Dee Dee and Dionne helped teach Whitney about music and singing, and just being around such talents helped put Whitney in a spot where she knew she wanted to do music as well. Dee Dee also served as a backup singer for Whitney's early tours and recordings and helped to coach Whitney's vocals. But Dee Dee's closeness to Whitney didn't end there, and I've got to tell you right now, this is where things get very, very dark. A 2018 documentary film on the life of Whitney Houston included allegations that Dee Dee had molested Whitney and her half-brother Gary. And I know that sounds pretty bizarre, but the producers, Kevin McDonald, did have some evidence to support his claims. And according to Whitney's half-brother Gary, he said, "Being a child, being 7, 8, 9 years old, and being molested by a female family member of mine. My mother and father were gone a lot, so we stayed with a lot of different people. 4 or 5 different families who took care of us." Those were Gary's exact words to producers Kevin. And a week or two into production of the movie, Whitney's former personal assistant, Mary Jones, told Kevin the story of how Whitney was also abused by her beloved Aunt Dee Dee. According to Mary's on-camera interaction with Kevin, she said, and I quote, "Houston looked at me and said, 'Mary, I was molested at a young age too. But it wasn't by a man, it was by a woman. She had tears in her eyes,' she said. 'Mommy don't know the things we went through.' I said, 'Have you tried to tell your mother?' She said, 'No.' I said, 'Well, maybe you need to tell her.' She said, 'No, my mother would hurt somebody if I told her who it was.' She just had tears rolling down her face, and I just hugged her. I said, 'One day, when you get the nerve, you need to tell your mother. It will lift the burden off you.'" Whether this is true or not, it doesn't take away the fact that Dee Dee Warwick was truly an inspiration to Whitney's musical career. Dee Dee Warwick passed away on October 18, 2008 at the age of 66. But it doesn't end there.
And bad times, I'll be on your side forevermore.
Dee Dee's sister Dionne was not just an influence in Whitney's career. She was part of the reason behind Whitney signing her first major contract with Arista Records on April 10, 1983. Dionne Warwick was born on December 12, 1940, an American singer, actress, and television host. Dionne was also signed to Arista Records at some point in her career and worked with Whitney's mother, Cissy, as a member of the Drinkard Sisters. In addition to Whitney's already star-studded extended family is one of America's biggest sopranos, Leah Price. Leah Price was born on February 10, 1927, and was the first African-American soprano to receive international recognition. This may or may not come as a shock to you, but Leah Price is actually cousins with Whitney Houston. Price's career spanned more than 3 decades, during which she performed many of the most iconic roles in the operatic repertoire, including Aida, Tosca, and Carmen, among others. She also collaborated with some of the most celebrated conductors and orchestras of her time, and her recordings of operatic arias and songs remain some of the most beloved and acclaimed in classical music history. But here's where Price really changed the game. Her influence on the world of opera and classical music cannot be overstated. She broke barriers for Black artists, becoming the first African-American to perform in lead roles at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, single-handedly paving the way for future generations of artists of color. Now, with Whitney's fame and fortune, the media began to openly speculate about her romantic life. Whitney was not usually seen with guys, but she was often seen with a good friend of hers by the name of Robin Crawford.
Having me there as a friend, I would often hear her say, "I don't need any more friends."
Crawford and Houston met in 1980 while they were both working at a summer camp. Whitney always insisted that she and Crawford were just good friends, but since she never seemed to have any male companions, the rumor mills ran wild with stories that Whitney and Crawford were intimately involved. Whitney continuously denied those rumors and stressed that she didn't have any interest in anyone at the time. These rumors got so wild that Whitney had to go on record to say this: "I really do very ordinary things with my life. I eat, sleep, sing, play tennis, and play with my cats. Being alone is very important to me, but when I'm with friends, I laugh, joke, fool around, act normal." However, in Crawford's memoir, A Song for You, My Life with Whitney Houston, published in 2019, she revealed that she and Whitney had a romantic relationship that began in the early 80s and lasted for several years. And this wasn't a shock to anyone because Whitney sang so many beautiful love songs that it made it hard to believe she imagined the expressions in those words without actually experiencing them for real.
She asked me to love her. If you love me unconditionally. And she was worth it.
But as time went by, Crawford and Whitney eventually grew apart. Today, Crawford is an author and an activist for the LGBTQ community. And as Whitney Houston continued to ride the tides of success, she had a few notable love interests that you may not have known about. One of Whitney's love interests was Hollywood superstar Eddie Murphy.
If he eats the blood, they could kill him.
Yes.
Oh.
Whitney and Eddie Murphy had a romantic relationship in the mid to 1980s at the peak of both their careers, and the relationship quickly became a hot topic in the tabloid press. Despite their high-profile romance, Murphy and Houston's relationship was short-lived. They reportedly broke up only after a few months, although the exact reason for their split is not clear. Some reports suggest their busy schedules and the pressure of their careers may have played a role in the breakup. But there wasn't any bad blood between them as they continued to remain friends throughout their career. Whitney also had romantic relationships with American music and former member of the Jackson 5, Jermaine Jackson, as well as former American football quarterback and current NFL coach Randall Cunningham. But of all these relationships, only one of them stood out, and that was her relationship with Bobby Brown.
Wait a minute, you know the rap? Sing along! Too hot to handle, too cold to hold.
Bobby Brown is an American singer and ex-husband to Whitney Houston. Born on February 5th, 1969, Bobby Brown was one of the pioneers of swing beat, a fusion of hip-hop and R&B. He was also part of an R&B group called New Edition before starting a solo career around 1985. Bobby had a fair amount of success as a musical artist. You might have heard some of his hit songs like Humpin' Around, Get Away, and Good Enough. He has sold about 50 million records worldwide, which I believe is extremely impressive. But some would say the real highlight of his life was his relationship with Whitney Houston. Bobby Brown met Whitney at the 1989 Soul Train Awards, and soon after, the two started dating. The relationship was a perfect blend of Bobby Brown's bad boy persona and Whitney's good girl background. Whitney's mother wasn't particularly happy about her relationship with Brown, and neither was her father, John Houston. However, the two shared a bond, and that's all that mattered. At least that's what everyone thought before things turned toxic. Close friends and family expressed concern about Whitney and Brown's crooked love. According to Cissy, in her book, Remembering Whitney, she wrote, "I do believe her life would have turned out differently. It would have been easier for her to get sober and stay sober. Instead, she was with someone like her who wanted to party. To me, he never seemed to be a help to her in the way she needed." Bobby and Whitney got married in 1992 after dating for 3 years. And to tell you the truth, none of her close family members were thrilled about this marriage. But Whitney had shared so many soulful love songs with the world, it was time for her to get some of her own. With that being said, less than 9 months later, their daughter Bobby Christina Houston Brown was born. Now, in her book, Remembering Whitney, Sissy described a scene she encountered during a visit to Whitney and Bobby's home in 2005, where she saw the walls and doors painted with big glaring eyes and strange faces. After having seen what she thought were several disturbing scenes, Sissy tried to get her daughter away from Bobby and into rehab. Eventually, Whitney got a divorce from Bobby Brown, leading to her final lover, Ray J. You might know him from his little fling with Hollywood celebrity Kim Kardashian, but what you might not know is that Ray J actually had a romantic relationship with Whitney Houston. Born on January 17, 1981 in Macomb, Mississippi, Ray J's entertainment career began in the 1990s when he appeared in television commercials and made his acting debut in the sitcom The Sinbad Show. Ray J and Houston started a romantic relationship right after Whitney divorced Bobby Brown in 2007. At first, they tried to keep it really private, but you and I know nothing is ever truly kept hidden from the media. And despite the fact that Ray J was over a decade younger than Whitney, they both seem to be pretty in love. So what do you know about her children? Well, Whitney had two of them, Bobby Christina Brown and Nick Gordon. However, this is where the story gets very tragic. The story of Whitney's daughter, Christina Brown, is one that gets scarier as you dive deep into it. Christina was born March 4th, 1993 in New Jersey. Through her mom, Christina was embodied in a long list of outstanding musical talents and grew up in front of the cameras. She was first seen on camera with Whitney Houston during an interview with Barbara Walters at 8 months old, and then in 1994 when Whitney was accepting an award at the American Music Awards. The Guardian writer Carolyn Sullivan characterized Brown's childhood as difficult because of her parents' drug problems. But the real difficulty in Christina Brown's life came when Whitney Houston passed away on February 11, 2012 at the age of 48. The official cause of her death was accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. After the death of her mother, Christina Brown expressed her intention to carry on her mother's legacy by becoming a singer, along with starting a career as an actress and dancer. Bobby Christina Brown also made a shocking decision with Nick Gordon that left the world stunned. Now, as you go down the rabbit hole, things just keep getting weirder. Nick was not related to the Houston family by blood, but he was formally adopted by Whitney Houston when he was just 12 years old. A year after Whitney's death, Bobby Christina Brown made headlines when she announced her engagement to Nick Gordon. The news of their romantic involvement sparked controversy within the family, as Christina Brown had previously referred to Gordon as her big bruh on social media. However, Christina Brown claimed that later her grandmother Sissy had given them her blessing prior to their engagement. So in January 2014, Brown and Gordon announced that they were married, though they never actually went through with the legal marriage. And a year after this alleged marriage, Bobby Christina passed away. On January 31st, 2015, Gordon and a friend found Christina Brown unresponsive in a bathtub at her home in Alpharetta, Georgia. They administered CPR until emergency medical services arrived. Christina Brown was then transported to North Fulton Hospital in Roseville, Georgia, where doctors found no evidence of drugs or alcohol initially, but this was later disputed. Sadly, Christina Brown passed away while in hospice care on July 26, 2015. Nick was later accused of playing a role in her death and was ordered to pay $36 million in damages in a lawsuit filed by the Houston estate. He was denied an invitation to Christina Brown's funeral and was banned from her gravesite. But that's just one part of the story. The other part is Nick was also addicted to drugs and had been arrested multiple times for drug-related charges. Then on January 1st, 2020, Nick was also found dead from a heroin overdose. If you've been listening all along, you should see the pattern here. First it was Whitney, then it was her daughter, and finally Nick Gordon, all passing away in a similar fashion. Now, I'm not a fan of conspiracies, but could there be more to Whitney Houston's family than we already know? Or is this all just one big coincidence? If you enjoyed this video, then check out either of the videos showing on your screen right now. Just click on any one and I'll see you there.